For 30 years, Wes Calloway did everything right. He worked tirelessly at the same factory, paid his bills, and raised his son the best he could. But when he's suddenly let go, he finds himself standing at a crossroads, lost, directionless, and questioning everything. With nowhere else to turn, Wes takes a chance on a cryptic job posting for a mechanic on a remote farm. What he doesn't expect is Isla Waverly, a fiercely independent woman with secrets of her own, a farm on the brink of collapse and walls built too high for anyone to climb. What starts as a job of necessity soon turns into a fight for something much bigger, a battle for land, love, and second chances. But will Wes finally find where he truly belongs? And will Isla let him in before it's too late? If you love heartfelt, slow-burn romances, stories about resilience, healing, and the power of unexpected love, then you won't want to miss this one. Subscribe now to follow the full story of struggling single dad quits his job after 30 years, only to find love with a mysterious farm owner and discover why sometimes the hardest goodbyes lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Now, let's dive into the story. Wes Calloway never thought he'd be starting over at 52. For 3 decades, he had clocked into the same factory, walked the same hallways, and handled the same machines with the precision of a man who found his identity in his work. But all of that had vanished in an instant. A severance package, a handshake, and a hollow farewell. He sat in his old pickup truck, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him from floating into the unknown. The factory loomed behind him, a monolith of steel and concrete that no longer had room for men like him, men who had built their lives around loyalty, hard work, and routines that felt permanent until they weren't. The radio played softly, but he wasn't listening. His thoughts drowned out the lyrics, cycling through the same questions he'd been asking himself since that morning. What now? Who am I without this job? What do I even have left? He glanced at the passenger seat, where a faded photo of his late wife Maggie rested against the dashboard. She had always told him there was more to life than work, that he was more than his paycheck. He wished he had listened. A vibration in his pocket startled him. A text. Jude. Dad, are you okay? Call me when you can. His son. 20 years old. Studying. Engineering. Smart, driven, independent, just like Maggie. But Wes had missed so much of his childhood, burying himself in overtime, telling himself that providing was the same as being present. Now that Jude was grown, Wes realized just how little they actually knew each other. Wes exhaled, shoving his phone back into his pocket. He wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. A road to nowhere, with nowhere to go and nothing to do, Wes drove. The farther he got from town, the more the landscape changed. Factories and gas stations gave way to sprawling fields, golden with late summer light. He hadn't taken the back roads in years, but something about them felt right tonight. After an hour, his stomach grumbled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since morning. He spotted a rustic little diner up ahead, its neon sign flickering. As if it were tired of holding on, he pulled in, the gravel crunching under his tires. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and bacon grease, the kind of place where the waitress knew your name and never let your cup go empty. Wes slid into a booth, grateful for the anonymity. A waitress, probably in her 60s, with silver hair tucked under a bandana, approached. "What can I get you, hun?" He hesitated. "Just coffee. Black." She gave him a knowing look as if she could see right through him. "Tough day?" "You could say that," he muttered. She poured his coffee. "Honey, when one door closes, another one opens. You just gotta be looking in the right direction." Wes offered a tired smile, easy for her to say. As he sipped his coffee, his eyes drifted to the bulletin board near the counter. It was cluttered with flyers for lost dogs, local church events, and one handwritten note that caught his attention. "Help wanted. Experienced mechanic needed at Willow Ridge Farm. Room and board available. Contact Isla Waverley. Wes frowned. A farm. He hadn't touched a tractor since he was a teenager helping his uncle on summer breaks. But machines were machines, weren't they? He pulled out his phone, typing the number into his contacts. He didn't call, not yet, but he left the number on his screen, letting the possibility linger. The next morning, Wes found himself still thinking about the flyer. What else do I have to lose? Before he could talk himself out of it, he dialed. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice, low and steady, answered. Isla Waverley. Wes cleared his throat. I saw your flyer at the diner. You're looking for a mechanic. A pause. You have experience with farm equipment? I have experience with machines. Another pause. How soon can you be here? His grip tightened on the phone. Where exactly is here? Willow Ridge. About 40 minutes out of town. You. Coming or not? She wasn't one for pleasantries. He liked that. I'll be there by noon. She hung up before he could say anything else. Wes stared at his phone. Well, that was abrupt. But something about her voice intrigued him. A quiet strength, a guarded edge. This wasn't just some farmer looking for help. There was more to Isla Waverley than she let on. And for the first time in months, Wes felt a flicker of curiosity. The drive to Willow Ridge was beautiful. Rolling fields, sun-drenched pastures, and a sky so blue it made him forget for a moment that he was a man without a plan. When he arrived, he pulled into a long dirt driveway leading to a farmhouse that looked sturdy but weathered, like it had stood through its fair share of storms. Barns and silos stood tall in the distance, and near the fence a chestnut-colored horse flicked its tail in the breeze. A woman stood on the porch, arms crossed. She was younger than he expected, maybe late 40s, with dark auburn hair tied. Back and eyes as sharp as they were unreadable. Isla Waverley. She didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake, just studied him like she was deciding whether he was worth her time. You Wes? That's me. She nodded, glancing at his truck. You bring tools? They're in the back. Good. She turned toward the barn. You're late, Wes blinked. He glanced at his watch. It was 11:58. He let out a quiet chuckle. This is going to be interesting. As he followed her toward the barn, he realized something. For the first time since losing his job, since feeling like his life had been stripped away, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was wondering what came next, and maybe, just maybe, this place had the answer. Wes followed Isla across the gravel driveway, his boots crunching against the ground as they approached the large, weathered barn. He could tell it had seen better days. The red paint was peeling, and the doors sagged slightly on their hinges. But the structure itself was solid. First rule of working here, Isla said, her voice firm but even. If something's broken, don't ask me how it happened. Just fix it. Wes smirked. That happened a lot around here. Isla shot him a sidelong glance but didn't answer. Instead, she pushed open the barn door, revealing the machinery inside. Tractors, plows, and old combines stood in various states of disrepair, some covered in tarps, others clearly in need of attention. This is your playground, she said. Can you handle it? Wes took a slow walk around the barn, assessing the damage. He ran his fingers along a rusted engine, noting the corroded belts, cracked tubing, and signs of years of wear. Isla was right. This place needed help. Most of these machines are older than I am, he said, crouching beside a tractor with a missing wheel. Parts might be hard to find. I've got a junkyard of old equipment behind the east field, Isla replied. You'll find what you need. Wes stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. All right, where do you want me to start? Isla folded her arms, studying him for a moment. You tell me. If you're half as good as you say, I shouldn't have. To hold your hand. There it was again, that guarded edge, that unwillingness to trust. Wes wasn't offended. He'd spent a lifetime working under skeptical bosses, proving himself through action rather than words. This was no different. He turned back to the equipment, running through a mental checklist. Finally, he pointed at an old John Deere tractor. That one. If you can't move hay, you can't run a farm. Isla nodded as if approving of his logic. Good choice. I'll be back in a few hours. And just like that, she was gone. Wes exhaled, rolling up his sleeves. This was what he knew. Fixing things, getting his hands dirty, solving problems one piece at a time. He popped the tractor's hood, shaking his head at the clogged air filters, frayed wiring and gunked-up fuel lines. It wasn't anything he couldn't handle, but it would take time, patience, and the right tools. From the corner of the barn, he spotted a metal toolbox covered in dust. He flipped it open, inspecting the wrenches and screwdrivers inside. Not bad. Old, but still functional. Hours passed in a steady rhythm, unbolting rusted parts, replacing filters, cleaning debris, tightening loose connections. The work was familiar, and for the first time in days, his mind wasn't dwelling on what he had lost. As he worked, a soft whinny caught his attention. He turned toward the open barn doors and saw a chestnut-colored horse standing near the fence, watching him with calm, intelligent eyes. Well, aren't you a curious one? Wes murmured. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over. The horse flicked its ears, but didn't shy away. Wes extended a hand, palm open, letting the horse sniff before gently running his fingers down its muzzle. What's your name, huh? His name's Gopper, a voice answered behind him. Wes turned to see a tall, lean man in his 60s, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a dust-covered flannel shirt. He carried himself with the ease of someone who had spent his life under the sun. Gus Holloway, the man said, extending a hand. I live down the road, been helping out around here since before Isla could walk. Wes shook his hand, feeling the strength of a man who had worked the land his whole life. Wes Calloway, just started today. Gus studied him, nodding slowly. So, you're the new guy? Looks like it. Gus chuckled. Isla ain't the easiest person to work for, but if she let you in that barn, you're already ahead of most. Wes leaned against the fence. She doesn't trust people easily, does she? Nope. Gus looked toward the farmhouse, his face unreadable. She's got her reasons. Wes didn't press. He had spent a lifetime working with people who carried burdens they weren't ready to share. Isla would open up when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Either way, he had a job to do. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, Wes had made significant progress on the tractor. The engine purred smoothly, and the hydraulic system, while still needing some tweaks, was functional. He wiped sweat from his forehead just as Isla returned. She walked into the barn, her sharp eyes scanning his work. You finished? She asked. See for yourself? Wes climbed into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, steady and strong. He maneuvered the tractor. Forward a few feet, then back, smooth as silk. Isla's expression didn't change, but he caught the briefest flicker of approval in her eyes. Not bad, she admitted. Wes smirked. High praise coming from you. She huffed, but there was a trace of amusement in her voice when she said, You hungry? It took him a second to process the question. He had been so caught up in working he hadn't realized how hungry he actually was. I could eat, he admitted. Isla nodded toward the farmhouse. Come on, then. Dinner's at 6. If you're late, you don't eat. Wes grinned. Well, that's motivation if I've ever heard it. She shook her head but didn't argue. As Wes followed her toward the house, he felt a strange sense of belonging. He had only been here a day, but something about this place, the land, the work, the people, felt like it had been waiting for him. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just passing through. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. The farmhouse was as unpretentious as its owner. The wooden floors creaked beneath Wes's boots as he stepped inside, following Isla into the kitchen. The scent of freshly baked cornbread and something savory simmering on the stove filled the air, an unexpected contrast to Isla's no-nonsense demeanor. The table was set simply, 2 plates, 2 glasses, and a pitcher of iced tea. Gus was already there, lounging in a chair as if he belonged, which Wes figured he probably did. "You made it just in time," Gus said with a smirk, sipping his tea. "I told Isla you might not last past day 1. Isla shot Gus a look. "He's still here, isn't he?" Wes smirked, taking a seat. "I'm tougher than I look." "You'd have to be," Gus chuckled. Isla ladled out portions of hearty beef stew, setting a plate in front of Wes without much ceremony. "You eat fast, you work hard, you clean up after yourself," she said, sitting down across from him. "That's how it works around here." "Noted," Wes replied, picking up his spoon, and took a bite, and was immediately taken aback. The stew was rich, flavorful, and filled with just the right balance of seasoning. He had expected something functional, but this was damn near gourmet. "You cook like this every night?" he asked, unable to keep the surprise out of his voice. Isla barely glanced up. "It's food," Gus chuckled, shaking his head. "What she means is she's been cooking since she was old enough to reach the stove. Her mama ran this farm before her, and if there was one thing she insisted on, it was knowing how to feed people properly." Isla gave Gus a warning look, but didn't correct him. Wes took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. There was a story here, a past she wasn't sharing, but he knew better than to pry. Not yet. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just practical, like everything else about this place. When they finished, Isla cleared her own plate and nodded toward Wes. "You did good work. Today," she said. "I need the hay baler fixed next. It's in worse shape than that tractor was." "Sounds like a challenge." "It is," she said simply. Then, after a pause, "You think you can handle it?" Wes leaned back, studying her. It wasn't just about the machines. She was testing him to see if he'd fold, if he'd back out, if he'd decide this life wasn't worth the effort. He gave her a slow, confident nod. "I'll have it running by the end of the week." Flicker of something, approval, passed through her eyes. "We'll see," was all she said before turning away. Wes woke the next morning to the soft sounds of the farm coming to life. The distant lowing of cattle, the rustling of leaves, as the wind moved through the fields. It was a different kind of alarm clock than he was used to, but it was oddly comforting. By the time he made his way outside, Isla was already up, feeding the horses and checking the fences. "She's always the first one up," Gus said from behind him, stretching as he stepped onto the porch. "Has been since she was a kid." Wes crossed his arms. "She ever slow down?" Gus grinned. "Not if she can help it." Wes watched her for a moment before heading toward the barn. He wasn't here to stand around. He had work to do. The hay baler was, in fact, a complete disaster. Its gears were clogged with dust and debris, its hydraulics leaked oil, and one of its belts had snapped completely. Wes sighed, rolling up his sleeves. "All right, let's see what we're working with." Hours passed in a steady rhythm, unbolting, cleaning, replacing. It was the kind of work that kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. By midday, he had made significant progress, but he needed one specific part to finish the job. He stepped outside, scanning the property until he spotted Isla near the fence line. "I need a replacement belt," he called. She glanced over. "Check the old shed behind the east field." Wes nodded and made his way toward the shed, pushing open its rickety wooden doors. Inside, shafts of sunlight pierced through the cracks, illuminating dusty shelves filled with old tools, broken machinery, and forgotten relics of the past. As he searched for the belt, his eyes landed on a faded photograph tucked into the corner of a shelf. A young Isla, maybe in her early 20s, stood beside a man he didn't recognize. They were laughing, standing close, closer than just friends. Before he could process it, a voice behind him cut through the air. "What are you doing?" Wes turned to find Isla standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Looking for a belt," he said simply, holding up the one he had found. She didn't move. Her gaze flickered briefly to the photograph before she stepped inside and grabbed it, tucking it into her pocket as if it had never been there. Wes could have let it go, could have walked past her and gone back to work. Instead, he took a slow breath and said, "He was important to you." For a moment he thought she might not answer. Then finally she spoke. "He was my husband." It was the first real glimpse into Isla Waverley's past, and it came with a weight Wes hadn't been expecting. "Was?" he asked carefully. She exhaled, looking away. "He died a long time ago." Silence settled between them. Wes didn't impress. He knew grief when he saw it. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time he meant it. Isla gave a small nod, then turned to leave. "Dinner's at 6, she said over her shoulder. "Don't be late." And just like that, the moment was over. But as Wes stood there, holding the replacement belt in his hand, he knew one thing for certain. Isla Waverley wasn't just a tough woman running a farm. She was a survivor. And for the first time, Wes wondered if fixing machines was really the hardest thing he'd be doing here. Wes didn't bring up the photograph again. It wasn't his place. He wasn't here to dig into Isla's past, and he certainly wasn't here to fix anything that wasn't made of metal and gears. And yet, the way she had snatched that photo, the sharp edge in her voice when she said "was," it stuck with him. By the next morning he had shoved it to the back of his mind. There was too much work to be done. The sun had barely crawled over the horizon when he found himself back at the barn, tools in hand, determined to finish what he had started. Wes had just finished replacing the belt on the hay baler when he sensed someone watching him. He turned to find Isla standing a few feet away, arms crossed, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand. "Morning," he said. She nodded, stepping forward. "How's it looking?" "Almost done. Needs some testing, but it should hold." She studied his work for a long moment, then handed him the coffee without a word. He hesitated before taking it. It wasn't just a cup of coffee. It was a silent gesture of respect, an acknowledgement that he was pulling his weight. He took a sip, strong, no sugar, just like he expected. "You always up this early?" he asked. Isla smirked, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Farm doesn't run itself." Wes nodded, glancing toward the fields, where the morning mist still hung low over the crops. "You ever think about hiring more help?" she scoffed. "People come and go, never stay." "You think I won't?" She turned her gaze to him, eyes sharp. "Testing him." "I think you haven't decided yet," she said simply. Wes didn't have an answer for that. And, truth be told, she might be right. Later that day, while Isla was tending to the horses, Gus wandered into the barn. "You fixing or thinking?" he asked, leaning against a wooden beam. Wes smirked. "Can't a man do both?" Gus chuckled. "You're picking up on things, aren't you?" Wes wiped his hands on a rag, sighing. "She's got walls up." "That she does." Gus picked up a small horseshoe from the workbench, turning it in his hands. "Thing is, walls don't just go up on their own. Something puts them there." Wes leaned against the baler. "Her husband?" Gus didn't answer right away. He ran his fingers along the edge of the horseshoe, as if he were weighing whether or not to say more. "His name was Daniel Waverley," Gus finally said. "He and Isla ran this place together. Good man, hard worker. They had plans, big ones." Wes stayed silent, letting the old man talk. "One winter," Gus continued, voice quieter now, "he was out in the north field, trying to fix a broken fence before the storm hit. A bad accident with the tractor. By the time Isla got to him," he shook his head, "it was too late." Wes exhaled, a slow, measured breath. That explained a lot. "She never left the farm after that," Gus said. "People told her to sell, start over, but she wouldn't. Said this place was all she had left of him." Wes stared at the barn floor, tracing patterns in the dust with his boot. "She ever talk about it?" he asked. Gus chuckled dryly. "You kidding? Isla doesn't do talking about it." Wes smirked. "Yeah, I'm getting that impression." Gus set the horseshoe down and gave Wes a knowing look. "But you, my friend, you might just be stubborn enough to get her to." Wes let out a quiet laugh. "Not sure that's what I signed up for." "Maybe not." Gus started toward the door, then paused. "But you're here, aren't you?" Wes didn't have an answer for that either. That afternoon, Wes was working near the barn when he saw Isla struggling with the fencing on the east side of the property. The wood had split in some places, and Isla was trying to hammer in new posts, her movements quick and forceful, like she was fighting the fence instead of fixing it. Wes grabbed his gloves and walked over. "Need a hand?" "I've got it," she said, not looking up. "Sure you do." Wes picked up a post anyway, steadying it in place. "But you'll get it done faster with help." She sighed, clearly annoyed, but she didn't stop him. They worked in silence for a while. The rhythmic sound of the hammer, the smell of freshly cut wood, the distant hum of crickets in the fields. It was oddly peaceful. After a few minutes, Wes spoke. "Gus told me about Daniel." Isla's grip on the hammer tightened. "I figured he would," she muttered. Wes adjusted his gloves, keeping his voice even. "I'm sorry." Isla kept working. "It was a long time ago." "Doesn't mean it. Doesn't still hurt." She paused mid-swing, the weight of his words settling between them. Wes didn't push. He just held the post steady, waiting. Finally she sighed, setting the hammer down. She wiped sweat from her brow and looked out over the fields, her eyes distant. "This place, it was always our dream," she said. "Everyone told me to sell after he died. Said it was too much for one person to handle." She exhaled, shaking her head. "But I couldn't. Letting go felt like losing him all over again." Wes nodded, understanding more than he let on. Isla turned to him, meeting his gaze. "You ever lose something that big?" Wes hesitated, then nodded. "My wife, Maggie, cancer, 5 years ago." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. For the first time, they weren't just two people working on a farm. They were two people who understood. "I don't talk about Daniel," Isla said quietly. "I don't talk about Maggie," Wes admitted. She tilted her head, considering that. Then, to his surprise, she almost smiled. "Guess that makes 2 of us," she said. A breeze rolled through the fields, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. For the first time, Isla didn't seem so guarded, and for the first time, Wes didn't feel like an outsider. They finished the fence together, the silence between them no longer feeling so heavy. That night, as Wes sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, he realized something. Maybe he hadn't just found a job. Maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The sky darkened faster than expected. Wes had spent the better part of the afternoon checking on the hay baler, fine-tuning the adjustments he had made the day before. Everything was running smoothly now, and he figured he'd earned himself a quiet evening, but nature had other plans. A strong gust of wind rattled the barn doors, and when he stepped outside he saw it, the storm rolling in, a massive wall of dark clouds swallowing the horizon. He'd lived in the Midwest long enough to know what this meant. A serious storm was coming. Isla was out by the far pasture, reinforcing some of the fencing they'd worked on earlier in the week. She must have seen the clouds at the same time, because she suddenly straightened, hands gripping the post, scanning the sky. Then, without hesitation, she started running. Wes didn't have to ask why. The livestock. If they didn't get the animals into the barn before the worst of the storm hit, they could lose them. Or worse, the animals could panic, break through the fences and be lost for good. He took off toward the pasture, meeting Isla halfway. "I need to move the cattle in first," she shouted over the rising wind. "You get the horses!" Wes nodded, sprinting toward the corral where Copper and the other horses were already restless, sensing the shifting air pressure. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "Easy, boy," he murmured, grabbing a lead rope as he approached Copper, who was stomping the ground nervously. "We're not going to let this one get you." The horse tossed his head, not yet trusting Wes completely. Wes didn't have time for hesitation. He reached for the rope, careful but firm, and finally managed to secure it. One by one, he led the horses into the barn, his hands steady even as the wind howled louder. Behind him, Isla was wrangling the last of the cattle, guiding them into the sheltered enclosure with practiced efficiency. Just as the first fat drops of rain slammed into the dry earth, they managed to lock the last of the gates. For a moment they just stood there, panting, watching as the storm unleashed itself. The wind howled through Willow Ridge, bending the trees nearly to their breaking point. The barn creaked, the old wood groaning as the rain lashed against it like a relentless tide. Isla stood just inside the barn doorway, arms crossed, staring out at the fury of the storm with a tension in her shoulders Wes hadn't seen before. "This ever get easier?" Wes asked, wiping the rain from his forehead. She let out a humorless chuckle. "Not really." He followed her gaze to the farmhouse, where the windows shuddered against the wind. "You worried about the house?" She shook her head. "The house will stand. It always does." But something in her voice said there was more to it. Wes watched her for a long moment, then leaned against the barn wall. "You ever lose a barn in a storm?" Isla inhaled sharply, the faintest flinch in her posture. It was answer enough. "My father's," she finally said. "Years ago, lightning strike, burned to the ground." Wes exhaled slowly. So that's why she had gone pale the second she saw the clouds. She didn't just worry about storms. She had already lost something to one. Wes didn't say anything. What could he say? He understood loss, but he wouldn't pretend to understand her loss. Instead, he simply stood beside her as the rain hammered against the land, drenching everything in its path. The storm raged for hours. With the power flickering at the farmhouse, Isla didn't even try to go back inside. Instead, she pulled up a chair in the barn, sitting near the horses, as if keeping an eye on them would somehow keep the whole farm from falling apart. Wes wasn't about to leave her alone, so he sat down too. They didn't talk much, not at first. The wind spoke for them, whistling through the wooden beams, filling the silence between them, but after a while it wasn't uncomfortable. Wes stretched out his legs, staring at the ceiling rafters. "I was 14 when I saw my first tornado." Isla glanced at him. "Whole town had to take shelter under the high school gym," he continued. "I remember thinking that if the roof ripped off, it'd be like one of those scenes in a movie, where everyone just gets sucked into the sky." She let out a soft chuckle. "Did it?" "No," he smirked, "but my old man held on to me like he thought it might." A pause. Then Isla murmured, "Daniel always said storms were just another part of life. You couldn't outrun 'em, couldn't stop 'em, just had to get through." Wes watched her carefully. It was the first time she had said his name, the first time she had let herself say it out loud, and it wasn't lost on him. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked quietly. She was silent for a long time. Then, softly, "Every day." Wes waited, sensing there was more. "But if I left," she continued, her voice barely above the rain, "what would I have left of him?" Wes swallowed hard. He had no answer to that, because he knew exactly what she meant. The storm finally began to weaken just before sunrise. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The wind fell into a whisper, and the heavy clouds began to break apart, revealing slivers of gold and pink in the morning sky. They stepped outside together, surveying the land. The fences were still standing. The barn was still intact. The farm had survived. Usla let out a breath she'd been holding all night, and "Not bad," Wes said, stretching his stiff muscles. "I half expected to wake up in Oz." That earned him a small, tired smile. She turned to him, wiping a stray strand of hair from her face. "Thanks for sticking around." Wes shrugged. Didn't really have anywhere else to be. She nodded slowly, as if she understood exactly what he meant, and maybe, just maybe, she did. As the sun finally rose over Willow Ridge, painting the fields in light once more, Wes had a feeling. A strange, unfamiliar feeling. This place, it wasn't just a job anymore. It was starting to feel like something more. The morning after the storm, Willow Ridge Farm stood resilient, but not without its scars. Branches littered the ground. A few fence posts had snapped clean in half, and parts of the barn roof had lost shingles, exposing wooden beams to the sun. But all in all, they had been lucky. Wes stood with his hands on his hips, surveying the damage. Isla was a few feet away, arms crossed, her sharp eyes scanning for what needed fixing first. "Could have been worse," Wes muttered. Isla nodded. Could have been. But there was something else in her voice. Something lighter. The storm hadn't beaten them, and maybe, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't facing the cleanup alone. They started with the fencing. It was hard. Tedious work, digging out the broken posts and driving new ones into the earth. But Wes welcomed it. The physicality, the rhythm, the way it let him shut off his thoughts and just focus. They worked side by side, falling into an easy, unspoken partnership. Isla held the new posts steady while Wes drove them into place. She passed him nails before he asked, when the sun got too hot. He handed her a bottle of water before she even reached for one. It was strange in a way, how natural it felt. By mid-afternoon, they had almost finished the repairs, and Gus had joined them, watching with mild amusement as Wes hammered in the last few nails. "You know," Gus said, leaning on the fence, "I haven't seen this place bounce back so fast in years." Isla arched a brow. "We're not done yet." "Sure," Gus chuckled. "But don't think I haven't noticed the teamwork going on here." Wes smirked, standing up straight. "Well, she's still the boss. I just do what I'm told." Idla gave him a sideways glance, but didn't deny it. Gus grinned. "That's probably for the best." By the time the sun dipped below the hills, exhaustion had settled into Wes's bones. He expected Isla to disappear into her routine. Clean. Up, eat alone, prepare for another day of work. Instead, she did something unexpected. "Dinner's in 15, she said as she passed him, heading toward the house. It wasn't quite an invitation, but it wasn't not an invitation either. 15 minutes later, he found himself back at her kitchen table, the same rustic wooden space that had started to feel a little less foreign each night. Tonight, it was roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and roasted vegetables. Simple, hearty, but undeniably good. For a while they ate in silence, both too tired from the day's work to fill the air with unnecessary words. And then, Isla surprised him again. She poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one across the table toward him. Wes raised a brow but took it. "Didn't take you for a whiskey drinker." "I'm not," she said, swirling the liquid in her glass, "but I keep a bottle around. Some nights just call for it." He nodded, taking a slow sip. It was smooth, warm, familiar, a comfortable. Silence settled between them. Then, out of nowhere, Isla spoke. "You ever miss your old life?" Wes exhaled, setting his glass down. He hadn't expected the question. "Yeah," he admitted. "Some days I wake up and forget I don't have to be at the factory. Then it hits me, and I realize I don't know what the hell I'm doing." Idla studied him. And now? He thought about it. Really thought about it. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But this place, it's starting to feel like something." Her expression softened, just for a second. Then she knocked back the rest of her drink and stood. "Get some rest," she said. "We start early tomorrow." Wes watched her go, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. She was warming up to him, and he wasn't sure why, but he liked that. The next morning, Wes woke to the sound of boots on the porch. When he stepped outside, Isla was standing by his truck, holding something. He frowned. That mine? She tossed him a worn-out leather work glove. His, but freshly mended. You ripped it on the fence post yesterday, she said casually. Figured you'd need it today. Wes looked at the stitching. It was small, careful, precise. She hadn't just fixed it. She had taken the time to do it right. He turned it over in his hands, something warm settling in his chest. Thanks, he said, voice quieter than usual. Isla shrugged, already heading toward the barn. Just trying to keep my best worker functional. Wes smirked. Sure, they could call it that. But somehow it felt like something more. The summer heat settled thick over Willow Ridge Farm, the kind that stuck to your skin and made the air feel heavier. The days passed in a steady rhythm, repairing, tending, mending, building. Wes had fallen into it seamlessly, as if he had been here far longer than just a few weeks, but the farm was more than just work. It was becoming something else, a place where his hands had purpose, a place where the silence wasn't lonely, and, maybe, a place where he belonged. It was late afternoon when a black SUV rumbled up the dirt driveway, kicking up dust as it approached the house. Wes was in the barn when he heard the slam of a car door. He wiped his hands on a rag, stepping out just in time to see Isla walking toward the vehicle, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. A man in an expensive suit stood by the SUV holding a folder. He was out of place, too polished for a Varm, too calculated in his movements. Wes didn't like him, and when the man spoke, Wes liked him even less. Ms. Waverley, the man said smoothly. I assume you've received our previous offers? Isla crossed her arms. I have. And? She glanced at the folder in his hand. The answer's still no. Wes frowned, stepping closer. The man sighed as if he had expected this. I understand your hesitation, but our client is willing to increase the offer. This could set you up for life. I already have a life, Isla said flatly. The man forced a smile. Ms. Waverley, let's be realistic. A farm this size, run by one person. It's only a matter of time before. I said no. Her voice was sharp, final, unwavering. The man's smile thinned. He slid a business card from his pocket, placing it on the hood of the SUV. If you change your mind, he said, you know where to find us. Then, with a measured glance toward Wes, he climbed back into the vehicle and drove off, leaving only the swirl of dust behind. Wes turned to Isla. You want to tell me what that was about? She didn't pick up the business card, didn't even look at it. Instead, she exhaled slowly. They've been trying to buy this land for years, she muttered. Developers want to turn it into a resort or some nonsense. Wes frowned. You ever consider it? She gave him a look so sharp it could cut wire. Not for a second. Wes respected that, but he also saw something deeper in her eyes, something she wouldn't say. What if they don't give her a choice? That night, Wes found Isla sitting on the front porch, staring at the horizon like she was waiting for something to happen. He sat down beside her, stretching his legs. You okay? He asked. She hesitated, then finally, I don't trust them. Wes nodded. I don't either. She took a slow breath, gripping the porch railing. They tried to buy the farm after Daniel died, she admitted. Came at me when I was at my lowest, hoping I'd be desperate enough to sell. Wes clenched his jaw. Classy. They backed off for a while. But now, she exhaled. They're back, and I don't think they're walking away this time. Silence settled between them. Then Wes said, You ever think about what happens if they don't take no for an answer? Isla's grip tightened. I don't have time for if. Wes respected that, respected her stubbornness, her fight, but something in his gut told him this wasn't over, and for the first time since arriving at Willow Ridge, he felt something unexpected, protective, not just over the farm, over her. The wind had picked up by the time Wes turned in for the night, but sleep didn't come easy. Something about the man in the suit, about the way Isla had stood so rigid, about the way she had watched the road long after he was gone, it gnawed at him. Sometime past midnight, a noise jerked him awake. Not the wind. Something else. Something unnatural. Wes threw on his boots and stepped onto the porch. The air was too still, too heavy. Then he smelled its smoke. His chest tightened. His pulse jumped. He turned toward the barn and saw it, a flicker of orange in the darkness. Wes didn't think, didn't hesitate. He ran. By the time he reached the barn, the small fire had already started licking at the old wooden beams. It wasn't much, not yet. But if it caught, if the wind shifted, the whole barn could be gone in minutes. Wes grabbed the nearest bucket, sprinting toward the water pump. "Isla!" he roared. Within seconds, she was there. One look at the fire and she didn't waste time asking questions. She grabbed a bucket and together they worked in frantic tandem, dousing the flames before they could spread. The fire hissed and sputtered under the water, sending up plumes of steam, and then, just like that, it was gone, leaving behind only the smell of smoke and something worse. A warning. Wes turned to Isla, breathing hard. That wasn't an accident. Her jaw was tight, eyes sharp. "No," she said, "it wasn't." They stood there, the barn still standing, but something irreversibly changed. The developers weren't just making offers anymore, they were making threats. And Wes, he wasn't about to let them win. Not while he was here, not while this farm still had a fight left in it. The smoke still lingered in the air. Even though the fire had been extinguished, its presence remained, a ghost in the night, a warning neither Wes nor Isla could ignore. They stood in the barn, their clothes damp from the water they had thrown on the flames. The flickering lantern cast shadows across the walls, the charred wooden beams, a stark reminder that this could have ended much worse. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Wes exhaled, slow and controlled. "You still think they're gonna play fair?" Isla's jaw was tight. "I never thought that." He studied her, the rigid set of her shoulders, the way she curled her hands into fists. Isla Waverley wasn't scared. She was furious. Wes wiped a hand down his face, shaking his head. Whoever did this, they weren't trying to burn the whole place down, just enough to send a message. "They sent it," Isla muttered. "But what's your answer?" She finally turned to face him, her eyes burning with something fierce, something unwavering. "They want me to give up," she said, voice deadly calm. "They can go to hell." By the time the sun broke over Willow Ridge, the fire was just a memory, but for Wes, the fight had begun. He wasn't a farmer, wasn't a man with roots in this land the way Isla was. But he knew bullies when he saw them, and he knew how to stand his ground. That morning, he found Gus sitting on the front porch, sipping his coffee like he had all the time in the world. "I heard about last night," Gus said before Wes could speak. "You two okay?" Wes nodded. "Yeah." He paused, then leaned against the railing. "You ever have trouble like this before?" Gus sighed, setting down his mug. "Not like this. There were always offers, sure. But this?" His lips pressed into a firm line. "This is different." Wes glanced toward the barn. "I don't think they're done." "Neither do I." They sat in silence for a moment before Gus spoke again. "Isla's stubborn," he said. "She won't ask for help." "I noticed." Gus eyed him. "But you're still here." Wes met his gaze. "Yeah." A slow smile tugged at the older man's lips. "Good." Because for the first time, Wes wasn't just here because he needed a job. He was here because this fight was his now, too. Later that day, Wes found Isla in the horse pasture, checking the fence line. She looked up as he approached but didn't speak. He leaned against the post, watching her work. "You ever think about calling the cops?" he asked. She snorted. "And tell them what? That a fire almost happened?" That someone's trying to force you off this land. She shook her head. No proof. That doesn't mean you should ignore it. She didn't respond right. Away. Then, after a moment, she sighed, gripping the fence. I don't ignore it, Wes. I just don't let it control me. He studied her for a moment. And if they try again? Her jaw clenched. Then they'll regret it. Wes didn't doubt that for a second, but he also knew this wasn't a battle she should be fighting alone. She was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever met, but even strong people needed someone to stand beside them. That afternoon, Wes took a drive into town, not because he needed a break, but because he needed answers. The town of Hollow Creek wasn't big. It had one main street, a hardware store, a diner, and a handful of other small businesses. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and if you knew where to ask, where people talked. Wes pulled into the parking lot of the Rusty Spur, a bar that looked as weathered as its name. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust and whiskey, a jukebox playing an old country song in the background. He spotted the bartender, a middle-aged man with a graying beard, polishing a glass behind the counter. Wes walked up. Hey, you got a minute? The bartender looked up, eyeing him. Depends. You drinking or asking questions? Maybe both. The man smirked. All right, what's on your mind? Wes slid onto the bar stool. I'm working out at Willow Ridge. That got the bartender's attention. With Isla? Wes nodded. Yeah, and I get the feeling some people want her gone. The bartender exhaled, setting the glass down. That'd be the Holloway Group. Developers? More like land sharks. They've been trying to sink their teeth into that property for years. She's one of the last holdouts. Wes leaned forward. You think they'd go as far as arson? The bartender's eyes flickered. He knew something. Look, the man said, lowering his voice. I ain't saying nothing for sure, but let's just say they're not the kind of people who take no lightly. Wes felt his pulse slow, not in fear, but in something colder, something resolved. He finished his drink, dropped some cash on the counter and stood. He had heard enough. When Wes returned to the farm, Isla was waiting on the porch. She studied him as he walked up, like she already knew he had found something out. Well? She asked. Wes stopped at the steps, looking up at her. They won't stop, he said. Not unless we make them. Her expression didn't change, but she didn't argue either. Instead, after a moment, she nodded. It was a simple thing. But it was enough, because for the first time, Isla wasn't fighting this alone, and Wes wasn't. Just a worker anymore. He was in this, for the farm, for her, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The next morning, the tension in the air was different. Wes could feel it as soon as he stepped out onto the porch. The usual quiet hum of farm life was there. The distant mooing of cattle, the rustling of leaves in the light breeze, the sound of copper pouring at the dirt in his corral, but underneath it was something unspoken, electric, waiting. He wasn't the only one who felt it. Isla stood by the fence, arms crossed, staring out at the land like she was preparing for battle. And maybe she was. Wes walked over, boots crunching on gravel. Get any sleep? She shook her head. Not really. Me neither. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Isla spoke, her voice quieter than usual. I keep thinking, what if this never ends? What if I spend the rest of my life fighting? People like them? Wes leaned against the fence. Then you fight. She let out a breath, shaking her head. Easy for you to say. Wes turned to her. You think I don't get it? His voice was calm but firm. I lost my job, Isla. 30 years in the same place, and one day, just gone. You think I don't know what it's like to have the world try to rip away the one thing that makes you feel like you still matter? She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time Wes saw something flicker behind those guarded eyes. Recognition, understanding, a quiet kind of trust. I know what this place means to you. Wes said. "And I know you're not gonna give up. So if you're still fighting," he exhaled, "then I'm fighting too." Ayla studied him, the weight of his words settling in. Then finally she nodded, and that was all she needed to say. The first sign of trouble came just after noon. Wes was in the barn when he heard it. The unmistakable sound of an engine revving, loud and aggressive, too close to the property. He stepped outside just in time to see a pickup truck speeding down the dirt road leading toward the house. Ayla was already there, standing on the porch, her face unreadable as the truck came to. A stop in a cloud of dust and tension. Two men stepped out. Wes didn't recognize them, but he recognized the look in their eyes. They weren't here to talk. The taller of the two, a man with a gut hanging over his belt buckle and a cigarette tucked behind his ear, spat onto the ground. "You're making this harder than it needs." "To be Waverley," he said, his voice thick with condescension. Scylla crossed her arms. "That's so?" The second man, shorter but stockier, took a step forward. "You should take the offer. Last chance." Wes felt his jaw tighten. They were trying to scare her, and if there was one thing he had learned about Ayla Waverley, it was that she didn't scare easy. She tilted her head slightly, considering them. "And if I don't?" The taller man let out a slow, smug chuckle. "Then you might start having problems. Real problems." That was it. That was the moment Wes stepped in. "Is that a threat?" His voice was low, controlled. Both men turned to him now, as if they had only just realized he was standing there. The shorter man smirked. "Who the hell are you?" Wes didn't blink. "The guy who's not gonna let you push her around." Silence. For a few seconds, it was just the wind and the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Then the taller man scoffed, shaking his head. "Ain't your fight, old man." Wes took a slow step forward, leveling his gaze at the man. "It is now." More silence, then, without another word, the men climbed back into their truck, revved the engine and sped away, leaving nothing behind but tire tracks and tension. Wes turned to Ayla. "You okay?" She didn't look at him, just exhaled, slow and measured. "They're testing me," she muttered, "trying to see how far they can push." Wes nodded. "Then we push back." That evening, Isla paced the kitchen, frustration rolling off her in waves. "I don't get it," she muttered. "They can't just take the land. I own this place outright. There's nothing they can do unless I sell." Wes leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Unless they make it impossible for you to stay." She shot him a sharp look. "What do you mean?" "They're playing a long game," Wes said. "They don't have to force you out overnight. They just have to make life hard enough that one day you wake up and realize you can't fight anymore." She scoffed. "That's never gonna happen." Wes smirked. "I know," she exhaled, rubbing her temples. I don't know what to do." Wes watched her for a moment, then said, "We make it harder for them than they make it for you." She raised an eyebrow. "You have a plan?" He nodded. "I do." And for the first time since this fight began, Ayla's expression shifted, not to frustration or exhaustion, but to something else. Hope. By the next morning, the battle for Willow Ridge had truly begun. Wes and Ayla secured the perimeter, reinforcing the fences, setting up cameras, documenting everything. Gus got in touch with a lawyer in town, someone who knew exactly what kind of loopholes developers like to exploit. And then there was the community. Because the thing about small towns, people talk, and when they heard what was happening at Willow Ridge, they started showing up. By the end of the day, a dozen locals had offered to help. One man, a rancher from the next town over, brought in extra fencing supplies. A woman from the diner organized a town meeting, spreading the word about what the developers were trying to do, and suddenly Isla wasn't alone anymore. Neither was Wes. As the sun set over the farm, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and pink, Isla turned to Wes, her expression unreadable. "You really think this is gonna work?" she asked. He met her gaze. "I think we just made it a hell of a lot harder for them to win." For a long moment she just stood there. Then, to his complete surprise, she reached out and squeezed his hand. It was quick, barely a second, but it was there. And in that moment, Wes knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't just about land anymore. It was about them, and he wasn't going anywhere. The next few days were tense but productive. With the help of the locals, the farm had never been stronger. Every weak spot in the fence had been reinforced. The barn roof was patched. Security cameras now dotted the property, hidden but strategically, and placed to catch any trespassers. Isla wasn't used to accepting help, but this time she didn't argue. Maybe it was because she finally realized she didn't have to fight alone. Maybe it was because of Wes. Either way, she let people in. And that changed everything. The sun had barely set when Wes heard the familiar hum of an approaching vehicle. This time, it wasn't some slick corporate SUV. It was an old beat-up pickup, and when the driver stepped out, Wes's hands clenched into fists because it was the same man who had shown up last time, the one who had made the not-so-subtle threats. Except now, he wasn't smiling. Isla was already at the door when Wes stepped outside, her expression calm but eyes blazing. The man, Randall Briggs, according to Gus, leaned against his truck, arms crossed. "You sure you want to do this, Waverly?" he asked. Isla didn't flinch. "Do what exactly?" Randall sighed, as if she were being unreasonable. "We made you a damn good offer." And I said no. His jaw tightened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Wes took a slow step forward. "Funny, we were just about to say the same thing to you." Randall's gaze flickered to Wes, sizing him up. Then he chuckled, low and cold. "This what you're doing now, Isla? Taking in strays?" Isla didn't blink. "This stray could take you down in 10 seconds flat." Randall smirked. "That a challenge?" Wes spoke before Isla could. "No, it's a fact." Silence stretched between them, thick as the summer heat. Then Randall exhaled sharply. "Fine, you want to play hardball? Have it your way." He climbed back into his truck, slamming the door. Dirt kicked up behind him as he sped away. Wes didn't move, until the taillights disappeared into the night. Only then did he turn to Isla. "You okay?" She exhaled slowly. "Yeah." But Wes could see it. She wasn't afraid. She was angry, and Wes had a feeling this wasn't over. It happened the next evening. Wes and Isla had just finished up in the barn when they heard it, a distant rumble, a deep mechanical growl cutting through the night. Then came the lights, blinding beams piercing through the trees, illuminating the fence line, a bulldozer. Wes's pulse kicked up. "You've got to be kidding me." Isla didn't waste time talking. She ran. Wes was right behind her. By the time they reached the fence, the bulldozer was already pushing forward, tearing through the first row of posts. And standing nearby? Randall Briggs, watching, waiting. Isla didn't hesitate. She climbed right over the fence, storming toward him. "You lost your damn mind," she snapped. Randall didn't even look fazed. "Just clearing some land. Thought we'd get a head start." "This isn't your land." "Not yet." Wes had had enough. He stepped forward, placing himself between Isla and Randall. "You take that thing any farther, and I promise you, this gets real ugly real fast." Randall smirked. "Oh yeah? And what exactly are you going to do about it?" "Old man." Wes didn't flinch, but he didn't have to, because suddenly lights flooded the property, not from the bulldozer, from dozens of trucks parked along the road, and stepping out of them, the town, farmers, ranchers, people from the diner, all of them here for Isla, for Willow Ridge. Randall's smirk faltered. "Problem, Briggs." Gus's voice cut through the air, low and sharp. He stepped forward, a shotgun slung casually over his shoulder. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trespassing." Randall glanced at the growing crowd, then back at Wes. Then at Gisela, and he knew. He had lost. He muttered a curse under his breath, then jerked his hand toward the bulldozer operator. "Back it up." The machine lurched into reverse, retreating. Randall turned to Isla one last time. "This ain't over." Isla crossed her arms. "Yes, it is." And for the first time, she truly believed it. Randall climbed into his truck, his face a mask of barely contained fury. But Wes didn't care, because as the last of them disappeared down the road, he turned to Isla and saw the weight lift off her shoulders. Just a little, just enough. She looked at him then, her expression unreadable. And then, before he could think, before he could process, she stepped closer, close enough for him to feel her warmth, the electricity between them, close enough for her to say, soft but certain, "You were right." Wes swallowed. About what? Her eyes searched his, something shifting, something changing. "That I don't have to fight alone." And just like that, something inside Wes unraveled, because he realized he had never wanted to just protect this place. He had wanted to protect her. And now, maybe she'd finally let him. The dust had settled. The battle for Willow Ridge was over. For the first time in years, Sheila Waverly could breathe. The developers were gone. The town had stood beside her. And the farm, her home, her legacy, was still standing. But something else had changed, something bigger than the land, and it had everything to do with Wes Calloway. The morning after Randall Briggs and his crew had slithered away, Idla woke up to a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of loneliness, not the silence of waiting for the next fight, but a silence that felt peaceful. She stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, watching as the early mist rolled over the fields. The farm had never looked more beautiful. And then she saw him, Wes. He was down by the corral, rubbing Copper's nose, murmuring something soft to the horse. A man who had come here a stranger, and now, somehow, he belonged. Something inside her shifted, something she had been trying to ignore, something she wasn't afraid of anymore. Wes felt Isla's presence before she spoke. "You planning on staying out here all day?" she asked, leaning against the fence. He smirked, keeping his hand on Copper's mane. "Could be worse ways to spend my time." She was quiet for a beat. Then, "So, what now?" Wes turned to her, studying the way the sunrise painted gold into her auburn hair. "That's up to you," he said, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Wes exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "The fight's over, Isla. I came here needing work, and I found something a hell of a lot more than that." He paused, meeting her gaze. "But I don't want to stay here just because you need help." Isla's throat tightened, because she knew what he was really asking. "Do you want me here?" "Not as a worker, not as a friend, but as something more." She gripped the fence, looking out over the land that had been her whole world. The place she had clung to out of fear of losing Daniel, out of fear of losing herself. But Wes, he had made this place feel like something new, and maybe, just maybe, she was ready to start again. She turned back to him, her voice steady. "I don't need help, Wes." His jaw tensed, like he had been expecting that answer. Then she stepped forward, closer than she ever had before. "But I do need you." The breath left his lungs. For the first time, there was no hesitation, no doubt, just Isla, looking at him like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And for Wes Calloway, a man who had lost his job, lost his way, lost his sense of purpose, nothing had ever felt more certain. Wes didn't need to. He closed the distance between them, cupping her face, brushing his thumb along her cheek. Isla didn't pull away, didn't flinch. She just let him in. And when he kissed her, it wasn't hesitant. It was real, steady, grounded, like a promise, like home. When they finally pulled apart, Isla let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Took you long." "Enough," Wes smirked, resting his forehead against hers. "You're impossible." You love it, he chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, I really do. And just like that, the last of the walls between them fell. The weeks passed in a golden haze of hard work and quiet, stolen moments. They built new fences, fixed up the old barn, planted new crops. But more than that, they built a life. Together. Gus called it a damn miracle. The town called it about time. And Wes, he just called it home. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, Isla turned to him. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Wes took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Not anymore, she smiled. Good. And as the stars blinked to life above them, Wes knew this was exactly where he was meant to be, not just for a season, not just for a fight, for good. Wow, what a journey. Wes and Isla's story is a testament to how second chances, resilience, and unexpected love can transform lives. But now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. I love seeing how far our community reaches. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming, inspiring tale. Your support means the world to me, and it helps bring more incredible stories like this to life. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching, for being part of this journey, and for believing in the magic of storytelling. I can't wait to see you in the next video.